So, hello everyone, I'm Olivier Galibert. I'm from the National Testing and Metrology Laboratory, or maybe the other way around, I never remember. And I've chosen to talk to you today about AI system trustworthiness. I'm not sure you know what it means. I didn't 6 months ago, but no, it's quite interesting. So what's the context? The idea is that you're in the industry, or in general, you have to do an AI system that's going to be deployed and actually used by people. So you define the system, you collect criteria, annotate data, you split out the evaluation data, you train your system, and you wonder, is my system good enough? You evaluate it. The correct presentation was perfect about that. And you see the results are nice, so is that enough to deploy it? And the answer is, as always, it depends. And the answer actually goes from, sure, no problem, go, deploy it, to, yeah, there's other things to do, to, you deploy it, you go to jail. So that's an interesting topic. And going to talk... yeah, it is interesting. And so that's an interesting topic, and I'm going to talk to you about an hour about it. So this is what I'm going to tell you about. So first, what's the trustworthiness of AI system? What it means? What's an AI system in the first place? Because the definitions are interesting, and how systems are classified, and which are considered critical and which are not, in fact. The second part is going to be what makes a system trustworthy, or the kind of characteristics that people look at to decide if it's trustworthy and hence usable, and quantifying the trustworthiness, and some side about explainability and ethics. And the last part, which could be a short one, is when it comes to mastering processes, design processes for AI, with two ways, which are validating processes or designing processes. So let's start. Trustworthiness on an AI system. What is it? The idea is to have an AI people can trust. That's in the name. But in practice, what this means is a concept that used by a lot of regulation and people in general to find what are the characteristics and the actions needed so that you can actually reliably put the system in the real world, and you're not going to have too many problems. So that's not really a fixed definition at this point. You can see how vague it is. But there's a number of studies that have been done on this topic. I think the oldest one is from 2020, so you can imagine how recent it is. We're going to talk about them. And that's, in fact, trustworthiness, the title of a European standard at CNELEC, which is currently not advancing at all. There's a lot of political problems going with it. And it's one of the pillars of the AI Act. So you can see one of the problems. Europe has said, the CNELEC, do a standard about trustworthiness, and the people doing the standards, which includes my boss, so that's interesting, are saying, no, it's too much of a mess, we're going out of there. So you can see how fluid that is. And the first question is, what's an AI system? There's been very interesting discussions in part at CNELEC for that, because nobody agrees what's an AI system. People don't want to encompass too much. They want to encompass expert system. Expert systems is system based on rules made by experts and that take a decision that exists since the 80s, even commercially and everything. So do we want to encompass expert systems because they have been existed for 30, 40 years? You want to put a new regulation on them? Maybe not. But don't we want to encompass too little? Because let's take the expert systems again. Somebody doesn't want to be under the regulation. Oh, I'm going to do an expert system to do the same kind of crap, and I'm not going to be under the regulation, so I don't need to care. So there's a tension between these two extremities, but something had to be done when it comes to standard, when it comes to regulation, when it comes to habilitations. So we end up with definitions that are different in every document. And what do they look like? There's a standards view. That's ISO IEC 22989, which was out maybe a year ago, maybe two, not more than that, which says AI artificial intelligence is a set of methods or automated entities that together build, optimize, and apply a model. That's the definition for model, I didn't put it. So the system can, for a given set of predefined tasks, which also a definition, compute predictions, recommendations, or decisions. An AI system is an non-shared system featuring AI. So if you can decide what is an AI from that, good luck. And reaching that definition was hell, absolutely hell. I was there at the start. I went away after a while because it was unbearable. I know that the vote eventually passed with the opposition of France. But, well, there's a lot of other countries, including the United States and China. Okay, that's what you have as a normalization standard definition for what's an AI system. If you can use that, good luck with you. So now you have the reglementation view, which it's going to be hard to ignore because the AI Act is going to, you have to respect it. It's a little better. An artificial intelligence system is a system that you can see receive machine and or human-based data and inputs and infers how to achieve a given set of human-defined objectives using learning, reasoning, or modeling implemented with the technique and approaches listed in Annex 1 and generate outputs in the form of content, blah, 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 blah. What's interesting is what's in the Annex 1, what kind of algorithms are covered by that, and that includes machine learning, but that also includes knowledge-based systems, so expert systems are in there. Statistical inference, I failed to see what's the difference with machine learning. I think there were some lobbying there. And optimization methods, which have been used for ages already, but it's wide. So it's very wide. What we're going to see later about the AI Act, it's not because you're an artificial intelligence system that you're going to have administrative stuff to do necessarily. It really depends on the aim of the system and so on. And then you have the view for one of the augmented. Yeah. Sure, go.
Yep. Please, what AI Act do you mean? Is it the regulation of European Parliament from a couple of weeks ago or something different? Yeah, thank you.
It's that one, the AI Act. With the uppercase and everything. And so there's the homologation view, which is interesting too, because they have to do concrete stuff. The EASA is the European Aviation Agency. So that's the one that authorizes planes to fly, in fact. Everything you put on the plane, everything you put in a control tower has to be authorized by the EASA. And the definition they use is any technology that appears to emulate the performance of a human. It's the one I like the most because it's very pragmatic. Maybe a little more complicated on the judiciary side, but in their position is that constructors go to them to have their system authorized so they can do whatever they want. So they can use this kind of a definition. So that was an AI system. Now, what you're going to have to do is going to depend on the kind of AI system you have. And so there's a classification of AI systems. There are multiple views, as always. And why? Because there are systems that are critical. If they don't work, somebody dies. Like autonomous driving, for instance. There are systems that can be ethically problematic, like system to recognize you when you're in the street and automatically do not nice things to you. There are systems that can be fully autonomous, so nobody controls them, so they can be critical. And on the other hand, there are systems that are none of the above. I mean, the system that, I don't know, enhance the image when you take a photograph. That's not fundamentally a problem. So there's two approaches I've seen for classification of AI systems. Either you look at the risk, that's what the AI Act does, or you look at the degree of autonomy of the system. That's what the EASA does, so for the aviation, USA does, that's for cars. So I'm going to give you the AI Act definition in detail because it's reglementary, so it's interesting to know in which category you are. There are 4 categories. There's the unacceptable risk, which is cognitive behavioral manipulation, so nudging and things like that, social scoring, and real-time remote biometric identification. These are strictly identified. You do that, you go to jail. These are the ones. So they are just forbidden in Europe, period. Well, it's relatively recent. There can be lobbying. There's going to be translation in local laws of the directive. But the idea is that these are just forbidden, period. And there's some exceptions, yeah, but not many. I think if you're the DGSA, you probably have an exception, but that's it. And there's high risk. These are the really interesting ones where you have to do a registration of AI and lots of things like that. You can look in the Act and you have to look what the translation in local regulation is going to be. But it's for critical infrastructure that could put life and health of citizens, so autonomous cars, things like that. There's when in the education when it can actually impact what you're going to be able to do afterwards, so like scoring of exams. I think things like selections at university is going to be interesting too. There's a safety component for products, like if you're an AI in a robot-assisted surgery, that's the example you have, it's considered high risk. Everything that goes around employment, especially access to employment, so CV sorting, for instance, that's usually grep, but it can be better than that, and it can be worse than that. Everything that's essential public and private services, so for instance, credit scoring, which is going to be really interesting if they try to import that in France or in Europe in general. And there's some more. It's an explicit list. Law enforcement, so yeah, you can see everything that comes with border and control management, everything that comes with administration of justice. You're not going to have a robot judge that decides just having the NIA without a human in the middle. Or maybe you're going to have it, but you are going to have to register it and things like that. And surveillance systems. So that's considered high risk, and there's a lot of things you have to do to make them legal. It's not impossible, but it's a lot of stuff. Then there's limited risk, where you have to say it's an AI, more or less. So interactive systems, if you make a chatbot has to say it's a chatbot, more or less. You have emotion recognition and biometric categorization, where people have to know that they're subject to that. And there's things like deepfakes, where it's nice, but you have to have somewhere appear that it was done by an AI and it's not a real photograph, for instance. And then there's minimal risk. That's all the rest. And everything that enters in minimal risk, that's most of AI is out there, you have nothing to do. You don't need to care, you're okay. So if you know that list, well, you can look it up. If you're not in it, you're okay. You just have to care. If you're in it, you have to care a little more. There's another way to classify is by degree of autonomy. And that's interesting because there's been two approaches there too. The aviation looks by what the AI can do. So there are three levels, assistance to humans, teaming, and even more autonomous. And they split that in two levels, which are levels of difficulty. And you can see the most extreme one is a fully autonomous machine that a human can't override. And the least extreme is human augmentation. And they use that to tell you what level of work you have to do to actually have a chance to have the authorization. And you have the other point of view is for cars. You probably have already heard about this qualification of levels of autonomy of cars. And there the criteria is not the capability of the system, but the amount of attention the human needs to have in the car, which goes from the human is fully in control up to you don't even need a steering wheel in the car. And you see multiple levels. Right now we are between level 1 and 2 in rail cars, we could say. When you have, ABS is like that, but when you have line following control or automatic braking, so that it goes into partial driving automation. And then you have higher levels when you can not look at the road that much, or where you can do something else, and the highest level is where you just don't even have a wheel in there. the thing like high driving automation is where for systems that, for instance, work on the highway, but not going to work in town, which was how Tesla was presenting their autodrive for a while. So you have a delay between the time you have to take control back again, so it's okay, you can go back to your activities and go on. So there's a kind of classification, and same way there are different levels of things to do to make a system acceptable, trustworthy. And the classification that way is an entry point into conformity. The RAI Act defines what to do for high risk, more or less, mostly. It's not entirely in place yet. Fully defines for the the low risk. You just have to say it's an AI. But the high risk depends of standards that don't really exist yet, so that's part of the problem. But I think the AI Act is not applicable immediately, but you see what's coming. The ESA defines the requirements for level 1 and part of level 2, which is human-machine teaming. The constructors are relatively prudent because PR problem with a plane is a real big PR problem. And in the automotive world, it's a mess. You have people like Tesla, Uber that are going to put vehicles on the road with an autopilot that's not qualified for what it's supposed to do. And you have the people that do the habilitation that consider they don't need to know everything about the AI, they just test the vehicle and it's going to be okay. It's going to be a problem before it goes better. So now the question is, what makes a system trustworthy? What makes a system acceptable? There are a number of criteria. One of the first studies on the topic was done by the high-level expert group mandated by the Europe to study the subject. They did 2 reports. One is, I don't remember the name, but defined this criteria, and one which is a checklist you can use, which is known as ALTAI. If you hear that name, it's what he's talking about. I decided to present this criteria a little in detail because it's somewhat interesting. Every other document has different criteria, but they end up more or less the same, thankfully. So there are 7, and we're going to take them one by one. First is human agency and oversight. That means 2 things. First is that the humans have to know they're working with an AI. They have to be able to make decisions regarding the system. They should be able to challenge the system, to disagree with it, and they should have the right not to having to follow the AI system all the time. It's really important, like you're in a bank to give a credit to someone. If it's mandatory that you follow what the system says, versus so you can do exceptions, it's completely different from an agency point of view, and that's the kind of things that is considered important, and I can agree with that. And there's human oversight, that's a little similar, being able to override the decision, but to be able legally, in fact, to override the decision too. It means that the process in your company allows you to do these kind of things. And also tell, okay, that's not a time where I can use that system. And this decision was wrong, I have to change it, things like that. So having the human being the boss, in fact, in the end, compared to the system. The second point is technical robustness and safety. So that's a part what you've seen this morning, but it's not only if it's accuracy, but also first start by resilience to attacks and security in general. That means be careful that your data is not going to be poisoned by bad actors or jokers. That's pretty much the same. Be careful about model leakage, because in a way open source is nice and everything, but if you have a model, if your model gets out, that means you can try adversarial attacks on it, and adversarial attacks are difficult to resist and a little hard to plan with. So there's all this problem of cybersecurity. that comes with AI that was not as pregnant before. You need to have fallback plans and general safety. For instance, you can have rule-based backup procedures when you see the system is having a problem. You can have ways to have a human intervention or even ask for human interventions. In general, that means you need to do a risk assessment of what is going to happen if your system is not perfect, and the system is never perfect. And if the environment of the system is not perfect, if you have sensors and things like that, if the sensors becomes imperfect, what happens and what is the risk, etc. And if you can see about monitoring, having external systems that look at your thing and says, oh, we're outside of where it's supposed to work, or what is giving out lights, it's complete nonsense, so it has to stop. Of course, you have accuracy, but accuracy is, we consider you have evaluated the system and you consider it's good enough. But what are your mitigations when suddenly it's not good enough? And reliability of and reproducibility. First is that non-deterministic systems are not a good idea. It's usually not a problem we have. Some optimization systems it can be, but in general, in neural networks, they are impossible to understand, but they are deterministic at least. And there's the issue of archival. Can you reproduce a decision that the system has made? Do you have the inputs? Do you have the models? Do you have the hardware to run in the same conditions so that you can reproduce what happened when the decision was not what you expected? First point, privacy and data governance. So there's the usual topic you can see with the RGPD of privacy data protection. And privacy considers the input data. I mean, you don't want to have the medical data of a person, for instance, get out, but also the system outputs. If you are, I don't know, refuse a loan, you don't want that to be known everywhere. Yeah. And you have to be careful with discrimination. Because in fact, you don't want the system to even indirectly take a decision for the wrong reasons. And that comes with the quality and integrity of data, because you know you have biases in your data. And there are good biases and there are bad biases. Good biases, you call that learning. Bad biases, you call that discrimination. And there's inaccuracies too. So you have to have an idea of the integrity of your data. And you have to be careful of malicious data, especially what we call self-learning systems that evolve as you use them. We all know the superb demonstration that Microsoft did with TIE, which was supposed to learn interaction with Twitter users, so he learned how to be a fascist, because people were having fun with it. And that's a kind of malicious data, in fact. And then there's all the problem of the access to data, where you have to limit the access to sensitive data to qualified personnel, so that's a very question of in-company procedures. There's transparency. Transparency means multiple things. There's traceability, which means you, as an AI developer, you need to be able to trace where your data is coming from, how the training was done, being able to reproduce the training, know your repair parameters, something like that, having all that written down somewhere so that you can trace everything that was done. You have to know which version system is deployed where, all these kind of questions. That's a requirement you're going to find pretty much everywhere, having everything traced. That doesn't mean you're going to publish the data or even going to tell anyone inside the company what your data was. But you need to have the information when you need it. There's explainability, or explicability if you want to do it the French way, which is a complicated topic by itself. I'll talk about it a little later. And there's communication. You have to make the AI system identifiable as such, and also communicate about the limit of their capabilities, so that people that use them are not surprised when they are outside of their area of competence, we could say. So we continue. There's diversity, non-discrimination, and fairness. So avoidance of unfair bias, always the problem of bias. There's inadvertence of historic bias. I mean, data we have was done by humans, and humans we know we are, or they are. They're usually incomplete, they can be badly managed too. Our recommendation is to have a diversity in hiring, but yeah, we know the problem. We do have some women in the assistance, but not that many, for instance. There's the problem for accessibility to make the systems, when needed, independent of, workable, not depending on the age of the person, of the gender, of their abilities, of their characteristics. That means the height, that can be the weight, that can be whatever. It depends on where your AI system is going to be used, but if your automatic faucet only works for white people and doesn't work for black people, you have a problem. Is it AI or not? That depends, but it's the kind of issue you can see can happen there too. And there's a stakeholder participation. If you're doing an AI system for a category of people, it's better when they're there when you develop the system. It can be a client too, but even the users as the client should be in the loop in the creation and the ergonomics and everything of the system. So there's societal and environmental well-being. That's a very fuzzy concept. I still consider fuzzy. So there's the sustainability, environmental friendly AI. So don't use too many GPUs or things like that. There's look at the social empire, look at society and democracy. I must say the Hashtag document on that is not very convincing, I could say. I mean, it's an important question, but in practical terms, I'm not sure what it means. And there's accountability. So there's auditability. So you need to have evaluation reports. You need to have entry points for analysis of what's going on, this kind of organization. You have to, if you have negative impacts, you have to be able to report them and without having your hierarchy going all over your ass and things like that. And you have to be able to identify them. And if you have trade-offs in your system, you have to identify them. And if you have a negative impact, you have to have ways to compensate for them. That's a problem. It's not specific to AI, but AI can exacerbate the problem rather quickly and even in an opaque way. So there's all this question of trustworthiness. So that was an example of what trustworthiness means. I hope you're still awake. And there's a question of, I have done my system, I try to do it right. Can I quantify the quality of my system in this criteria? And there's two documents that I found particularly interesting of the topics. It's the VDE spec with a horrible number, which gives a way to quantify a number of trustworthiness characteristics. And they also give a way to build a score from that. It's very annoying. And there's a NIST internal report, which is public, Trust and Artificial Intelligence, that builds the idea to use this score to build use cases and create profiles that define what is important in all the different characteristics and how to compute a global score from that. And it's currently evolving into what they call the NIST AI risk management framework, which follows the same ideas. So if you look at the IR, it's good enough at this point. So let me show you how they quantify with a part of their grid. They use what they call the VCIO model. They didn't invent it. It means value, criteria, observable, and indicators. So what's a value? A value is the high-level topic you want to care about. So you can see they have 5 in their proposal: transparency, accountability, privacy, fairness, reliability. You'll notice it's different from what Hashtag did because, of course, it is. That's never twice the same thing. And on these values, you pick one, you have criteria. What do you want to actually see about this? For reliability, for instance, you have relativity at the design time and relativity what's in operation. And then when you have this criteria, you have observables, what you want to measure. For instance, is the operational design domain of a system clearly defined and documented? Operational design domain is what kind of data the system is supposed to work on. It can be your vehicle is supposed to to be autonomous when you're on the highway, but not when it's snowing or not in town, for instance. That's the ODD. That's a very important part of qualifying systems. And then the quality and quantity of the data is fit for the purpose. The quality of development is good enough. It's robust, robust against varying environments. I think there are 7 or 8 in observables for in that criteria. And there are indicators where you take one observable and you have different level you can reach on that observable. For instance, what's the quality of development of a system answer? So with this evaluation we were talking earlier this morning. And you have 7 levels from A to G. G is no. The system is crap, nobody cares. F, you justify the approach and the models you use. E, you added a documentation of performance, evaluation, and optimization metrics. What's interesting is that's usually where we stop. And D, you add some testing, possibly virtual, inside the operational design domain to see if on new data you're actually still working. C, you just don't test, you have a testing strategy and you try to apply it. And then B, you even do live testing with your car, for instance. And A, you even don't work to assure that your testing has a sufficient level of coverage so that you can have confidence in your system. So you can see if you can have a degree of quality of what you've done in that criteria, and it's observable on the quality of the system. And in the VDE model, you have a score for each observable. There's the notion of negative anchors, which means if you don't have that on the observable, it's crap, then the whole criteria is crap. Positive anchors, if you're perfect on a criteria, and an observable is perfect. And skippable indicators, for instance, the privacy aspects, if you don't interact with humans, they probably don't care. And they do the means of means, and etc. That's the part that's not really usable. In comparison, you have the NIST model, which relies on score on different criteria. This time they have 9 criteria because, of course, it's different. And that was on that NIST. I think that's the oldest one. That's the 2021. So this document. Of course, they say you have to quantify the quality of all these 9 aspects, but they refer to not yet existing documents to quantify them. They say we're going to do it later. They're still in the later. But what's really interesting is that they propose the idea of profiles that are weights, prior weights, so you decide what they are, on the 9 criteria to quantify a relevant VI for the kind of system you're working with. This is an example, comes directly from the white paper. Between a medical AI and a music selection AI, you can see the levels of criticality is not the same. In the medical AI, you're going to care a lot more about explainability, safety, accountability. While on the music selection AI, you don't necessarily want all your tests about music to be known about everyone. So you care less about these ones, but you care more about privacy. But this kind of way you can tune, in fact, your scoring on the application you're actually working on. So now explainability, I told you I would talk a little bit about it. That comes from the DEAL white paper, very interesting white paper, which is, what's an explanation? Explanation, that even comes from Wikipedia, that one. It's a set of statements that are constructed to describe a set of facts that clarify the cause, context, and consequence of those facts. And I try to answer why and how questions, and depends on the knowledge and representation. The idea, you can finish with it if you want, but the idea is that with this explanation, a human is starting to have an idea of how the system is going to behave without having to test it all the time. You can build a mental model of how the system works, which gives you an idea of how it's going to answer, and you don't have to just test it to be sure what it's going to do. It becomes less opaque, less random. One of the difficulties, there are 3 possible targets for explanation. There's the developers, who want to know why the system give a given answer, and is it using good criteria. For instance, a well-known example is recognizing wolves from dogs, from photographs. It's well known that one system that did that recognizes the wolves from the snow around the around the wolf, because all the photographs of wolves were taken in winter, and the photographs of dogs were more standard things. The explainability could tell that the system, what was the most important to it was the snow and not the animal. So that's where the explicability is interesting for the developer. You have and then from that you can decide to mask these parts of the images or add new data with which are not in the SOA or things like that. But there's also the explanation for the user. Why did the system get it wrong, or sometimes what did it get right? And can I predict when it's going to be correct, when I can use it, or when I shouldn't? You have, I said I won't talk about it, but the GPT systems are very interesting for that, because the users really need to understand when the system is going to say something correct and when it's just going to generate text. They call that hallucinations. I'm not completely agree with the term, but if you have a real explanation of why the system answered that, you're going to have an idea of whether it's knowledge it has or it's something it invented. And then the question for the regulator. Can I have an explanation of decision of the system that allows me to judge whether the system did that for the wrong reasons? The kind of borrowing money is the standard one. Why did he choose to say yes or no? The regulator needs to know whether it's directly or indirectly, because like the person is an Arab and the Arabs are poor, so they are not going to reimburse the loan. If the system uses that from criteria, but it can be completely indirect, that's not acceptable. So you need the explainability for the regulator to be sure that the decisions are taken for the good reasons. And the reality is that the Sans has some proposal for the developer aspects. You probably heard of heat maps and things like that, but nothing much for the rest. It's really a research problem, and a very complicated one, because explanation also go with natural language and understandability for humans and things like that, and that's really not easy. In fact, the state of the art is so bad that the IACT had things about explainability in previous version and went away with them.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yesterday when Jean-François was talking about these issues, he made a distinction between explainability and interpretability. Looks like these bullets are kind of mixing some of them. I don't know, Jean-François is still here, so do you want to say anything, or?
Just I think what Olivier presented as the user needs is in fact the interpretability, because it's not dedicated to AI expert, but dedicated to the user or to the regulator. For the regulator also, we can't expect from the regulator to understand heat map, for example. So we need to translate the explanation, interpret it for the regulator. So it's not the same words, but it's exactly the same idea.
Yeah, you agree. And you can talk of explanation in all cases, but the needs of the explanation are not the same, and we completely agree on that. And yeah, what I was saying, the state of the art is so bad that the IACT was in the past talking about explainability, and they removed that in the current version because it wouldn't have been actionable at this point. Possibly. I can't say. And you're going to say ethics on that. Ethics is complicated because a lot of ethics are culturally dependent. We don't have the same ethics in Europe, in the US, in India, and other places like that. So when you look at documents that say they talk about ethics, you end up looking at the document that talks about trustworthiness in practice. And you end up with more or less the same criteria and everything. So, well, and that makes sense. You mean reliability, interpretability, and all these things. And it's also a lot about ethics, what's acceptable and what isn't. In fact, when you look at how it ends up, the AI Act with this level of risk is in also pushing for the European values and the European ethics as they see them. What they put in high risk, what is considered a risk, in fact, is also very much an ethical concept at this point. And a European ethical concept, I could even say. And now the third part. Going faster than I thought, but that's okay. The question of mastering processes, how you make systems. Because neural networks in particular are highly nonlinear. And so the conclusion is that testing may not be enough to detect bad behaviors. It depends on the scale of the testing, but in a way, if you take all the system as a black box, it's very difficult to be sure it's not going to be a problem in the future. In particular, we know it's possible to have backdoors in neural networks, a lot of things like that. So if it's completely black box, it's a problem. So an additional idea is that if the system is built correctly, following what we consider best practice at this point, there's a fair chance that it will behave correctly. And from that, there have been two approaches to tackle this question of mastering processes. Either you validate that the processes are correct, or you design a process, and sometimes people to adopt it, that you consider being state-of-the-art. So validation tends to go to what we call a certification. So what is certification? That's a specialty certification. You create what we call a referential. Well, we're not, that's an international standard. And that's, in fact, a set of questions a company which wants to be certified has to be able to answer to. And then you audit the company to see whether they actually answer the questions in a way you, as an expert, consider acceptable. And at this point, there's multiple types of possible certification, because why only one? There's 4 standards. There's going as IEC 42001, which is almost out. I think it's in the final voting at this point. You can see this as an equivalent for AI of 9001, that's for process, and 27001, that's for cybersecurity. So it's one of the management standards of the ISO that says how you're supposed to, what are the requirements when you create AI systems. Before it's usable, it's going to take a little while, because while the standard itself is almost out, the 42006, which is going to be what companies that actually do certification are supposed to answer to, is just starting, so you can count 2 or 3 years before it's possible to be certified on 42001. There are 2 private certification. For instance, we made one. We have you can be certified by the LNU as you're doing good work when you do AI. And there's 2 private labels, which are very similar to certification, but often a little less formal, we could say. And to give you an idea of what it looks like, our certification was created by a working group of AI practicing companies. I mean, it was just the LNU, 3 people in an office telling, oh, we are going to do a certification. There was, I think, 15 different companies in there, or maybe more. And at this point, it ended up being a pretty much exhaustive checklist of good practices. Is an example of a requirement, which the problem certification is in French, so I translate it to English. The AI functionality specification must be made available to everyone involved in the design, development, evaluation of maintenance of AI functionality. For instance, specification may be made available to the customers this and that way, but those are just examples. And when you go, you have to show how you made this specification available to everyone, including the developers. And how that works, because I think you've never seen a certification in your life. I know I didn't before I went to LNE. There's first an initial audit, which starts by the company sending a file describing their processes and a couple of projects to use them. And you have an expert that checks the files and see if there's a chance with this process that the certification passes. because if it doesn't, it's not worth taking the time and say, okay, read the certification and try again. And if yes, we go in the company and we sell a couple of days and we check all their processes compared to the referential and see if they actually answer the requirements. And we look for what we call non-conformities, so it's when we don't answer. And the major ones, where we consider that if they don't do that correctly, the system is going to be crap, tends to block the process, block the certification, and they have to do something about it. The minor ones, they have to handle them and put a process in place to ensure it won't happen again. But it doesn't usually put the certification in jeopardy. And we have also attention points who will tell them, okay, you're doing that, it's okay for the requirements, but you may have a problem for that or that reason, so think about it. We produce your report. I'm an editor for that certification. And there's an independent committee that reviews the report and decides on certification from that. I've never seen a case when they don't follow a recommendation. So. And then every year we have a follow-up audit, which is a lighter version, but we also take a couple of projects and see how they apply the things and just go fast over everything that seems still okay. What's interesting is that certification are in general done for commercial reasons. You get certified to be able to say, I'm certified, more or less. Some are mandatory, but that's not in AI. It's, for instance, when you analyze, what's it called? Amiant. I don't remember the term in English. Where some analysis and things like that, where there's a regulation on it, and then you have to have the certification, otherwise you can't do the job. You're not allowed to. And some end up mostly required through commercial requirements that you can't answer this call for bids if you don't have a 9001 certification, for instance. That's something you see often. So nothing is mandatory about 9001, but a lot of people with money ask for it, so you have to have it. And then there's another way of controlling processes, designing one and convincing people to use it. And that's what the ESA does, which we call the W-shaped process, where they are producing, on one side, they're producing a requirements document for authorization. So that's more or less equivalent to a referential certificate, which says, if you do that kind of ability in the system, that kind of autonomy, and you need to be able to answer that and that and that. But they are also required, because they are a European agency, to demonstrate that means of compliance exist. There's a way to actually reach these requirements. Because if you can't reach them, they can't do their job. So they have to prove they can reach them. And one part of their means of compliance is to have a full development process. So they made one inspired from the V-shaped process you may have seen in your life, which is currently being punched as the CNELEC in the European EUROCAE. So the European standardization process for all things aviation. And it's being picked up by other domains like rail, for instance, which found it interesting. I'm not going to talk about it that much, just to show it that it exists. But you can see it's you have to design the things, you decide the requirements, and you manage the data, then you manage the learning process, you train the model, you verify that your model is correct, then you implement the model in the often embedded system you're going to use it, you verify it once integrated, you verify with independent data, and etc. You verify that the requirements are met. And there are loops when you can, if it doesn't verify, you go back to that point to change the things and etc. So it's a whole process. It's relatively interesting. Not everybody agrees with it, but in fact, most of the comments I heard about it is just that they didn't like the W, they wanted a list, but the contents were the same, so who cares? So, well, I'm a little in advance, but it's okay. To wrap up, the acceptability of a system in what we could say an industrial setup, when we are going to have people use them, is increasing in maturity, but it's not there yet. We have regulations that are being put in place. The AIA Act is being the main one in Europe. people are starting to propose a way to quantify if a system is acceptable or not, which is kind of interesting from a paradigmatic point of view. There are standards that are being written, there are methodologies that are put in place, but we're nowhere near done. It's still evolving and evolving fast. So we're not sure where it's going to go, but it's really interesting. And if you want some reading, I hope you can have the slide. I give you the links. So you have the high-level expert group did, which is ATEX Guideline for Trust Warfare AI, that's the name, which has the 7 criteria I talked to you about. They were coming from there. And the ALTAI, the Assessment List for Trust Artificial Intelligence, which is a little similar to the VDE thing where I presented, but it's not quantified as much. It's more like a list of questions you have to ask yourself. You have the NIST paper, the 8330. I don't know if you know it, Craig. More or less. So I'll give you the URL, which has the idea of profiles and example of profiles. You have the document by video with how to quantify a number of aspects of the trustworthiness of your system. You have there's not deal written anywhere, but it's we could say the reference in explainability in an acceptability process at this point. So the white paper by Deal. So white paper, machine learning in certified systems. And you have the ESA concept paper, first usable guidance or level 1 and 2 machine learning application, which we call the concept paper because it's way too long otherwise. That's a proposed issue because this one is going to get out by the end of the year, more or less. And that's a version for commons, that's version March, I think. And that's where they define the W-shaped process and the level of autonomy and things like that. So that is it. If you have questions, you're welcome.
Thank you. Can you please comment how is the status with acceptance of the AI Act, because it's brand new and I think we are here from all the continents and it might be difficult to understand. And
okay, Europe is particular because it's more of a federation. So it depends on local governmental laws for each country. So in theory, an act, when it's passed in the European Parliament, is applicable immediately. Except I think on that one, given what's the state of the art, they decided to push when the act is going to actually be applied. What's interesting is that countries are supposed to do their equivalent law to put in their law corpus, more or less, for each country, to implement the act, in fact, which is going to precise things like what is the punishment if you do an acceptable risk level, AI or things like that. But technically, since acts are applicable immediately, even if the law has not been created, it can be applied. So that's very complicated. But in reality, you're going to have some years until local laws are created in each country, which is going to be a lot more pragmatic of what you can do, how you can do things, and things like that. Plus, at this point, the AI requires registration things and risk analysis that don't exist yet. We don't have the institution to do the registration, for instance. They're working on that. So that's why it's not applicable yet, but that gives you an idea of what is going to be considered important anyway.
So we can expect it will be valid in few years?
Yes.
Yeah, and it will be implemented in every country, in EU country, different way?
Hopefully not that different. One of the ways Europe uses to implement these kind of things is through standards. That's why they ask the CNELEC to do a bunch of standards, and it's complicated. So the idea is to have harmonized standards which are considered valid for all Europe. And the idea is that if you have an Act directive like that, and the directive says this and that standard allow to satisfy the directive, if you follow the standard and you're certified as following the standards, and if there's a problem, the person with the problem is the one who has to prove that he didn't follow the directive. If there's an inversion of the proof. If you don't follow an harmonized standard, then you have to prove that you did follow the directive. So that's the way they work, and that's why they work. But the standards has to exist, and they don't yet.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, like the main entities around you were speaking about, was it a product? Was it a software? Or was it a service? Like the V-shape procedure is about, like, what is the difference?
That procedure is done by ESA, so they are very the process that something that's going to be put in the plane or in a traffic control tower. That's their scope. So it's doing something embedded in the instrument panel. It's going to be an autopilot, but it can.
Okay, so but like
these kind of things. The AI Act, on the other hand, is anything that the public can access to, more or less. So it can be software, it can be a device with AI in it, it can be a lot of things.
So I have a particular example. There are a lot of research demos accompanying like speech synthesis papers, image generation papers. Do they need to follow the AI Act?
Yes, but most AIs just go in the minimal risk category where you have nothing to do.
I think it was said in the explainability lecture that anything with speech is in the high risk category.
Let's see. Which one?
No, not in like yesterday's lecture. I think like
because these are the risk level for the AI Act here.
Okay. Can you go to the? There was the emotional. Yes. Yeah.
For limited risk, so emotion recognition, things like that, the people just need to know there's an AI looking at them.
Okay, so like if it states that it's a research demo, it's enough.
Yeah. Okay. For a chatbot, you just say, I'm a chatbot. It's okay.
Okay, thanks.
You're done.
Thank you for a great presentation. Following up on that question, just for understanding, maybe this isn't fully fleshed out, or maybe
a lot is not fleshed out.
I can imagine it's very challenging. So, like, you know, if someone's going to deploy a system, like clearly this would be applicable. Would this apply, like, if somebody's you know, publishing code on GitHub? Or, you know, putting a model on Hugging Face, like like, is there any point where, you know, especially like a student or something, you know, someone put something online, are they, you know, responsible for adhering to these things necessarily?
That's where you need to talk to a jurist, which I'm not.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yes. I have one question regarding the emotion recognition. Is there no other social events that are targeted by this limited risk? or just this, why this focus on emotion in especially?
You're asking me how laws are made?
No, do you have any idea of that?
Yeah, I think it's lobbying and politics and emotional responses by people. I mean, you can see the list. In fact, the high unacceptable risk social scoring one is because they were talking about China at the time. So it's more or less something we can agree with, but the details are really the results of what was happening at the time when they voted it.
By the way, I'm guessing that, like, all of these risk categories and everything, they only matter if you're actually going to use the AI algorithm, whatever, to actually have some interaction with the public. As far as I can tell, if I'm just doing research and publishing my findings, I'm not making any claim about the usability of my algorithms or the, so in some sense, I don't think any of this is meant to be a damper on research, is it? Because after all, if I put up a model on Hugging Face and I say, this is my model, this is my research, I'm putting it there simply so that my research is, available for public scrutiny. Somebody else can take my model and see if it does what I claim it does. Right? But I'm not saying use this model to do something and make money, or you don't even have to make money. I'm not saying use this model for anything. I'm simply publishing a scientific finding. So I'm not getting the sense from your talk that any of that will be regulated by these, or are you thinking it will be?
I think that's a good question, because on one side, I don't think they wanted to regulate research. On the other side, there's an attractive nuisance kind of thing that can go on, because you put it online and people are going to use it for those things that are not supposed to be done, and is it acceptable or not? That's where it gets complicated, and it's going to depend on the local law of each country and how they implement that, and maybe jurisprudence. So honestly, I don't think research is going to care. I don't think open source is going to care. I don't think they need to care either. But well, if you're putting code to nudge people on GitHub, be careful with what you do.